Yeah, fantastic. So Ramsey and I had so much fun at the last Mobile on Air. We decided to come back again to do another discussion with you guys about marketing and tech teams working together. I don't know about you, but at the Airship team, it's been a busy few months and learning how to adapt and work through things differently. And we have a couple fun new topics that we want to go through today. So Ramsey's got a couple of slides to kind of kick us off and get a thought starter going. And then, like Ramsey said, we'll invite everybody in and have a live discussion.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Ramsey Kail. I lead the technical services team here at Airship, which includes our technical account managers and our technical consultants. And we help our customers implement and utilize our products from a tech perspective.
Jennie Lewis, I am the counterpart to Ramsey's team on the marketing and strategy side. I lead the strategic services team in North America.
So I think where we kind of wanted to get started today is, last time we talked about just fundamentally the differences between product and engineering and marketing, and how like trying to find common ground is really difficult. I think having some examples to that is probably useful. So, I put together a couple slides just to kind of show the differences in how we communicate. So, for example, a lot of my team and a lot of the people we work with on the dev and engineering side, they just want to see the documentation, right? Show me the docs. And so that's great. Like this is a good example of some of our documentation where we have, the ability to add or remove attributes, or the ability to add custom events to our service. And it's very detailed. We have a code sample on the right, but when we show this to somebody who's not necessarily on the development or engineering side, that's where it gets a little hard. And so the flip side of that is how does it actually work, right? So this is a slide that we've been kicking around and internally trying to figure out how to better explain things like all of our segmentation properties with attributes and tags and custom events to our users, not showing them the documentation. And so the perspective here is, okay, once your team has implemented this, here's how you as a marketer would use it. And Jennie, I think you've got some good insight on how this has kind of been effective when working with our customers.
New customers coming in, looking at the documentation is great, right? When you've got to develop it, but when you're trying to figure out what's the use case, what's my message, how am I going to personalize it, and what do we need to get in and kind of convert into a new system, something like this gives a way to visualize all of that data. It's splitting the difference between, what's something that's a piece of data around a user versus what is an action that a user takes, which is how, we really deal with custom events as an example.
Yeah, and from a dev perspective, again, going back to the kind of code samples, it's really just differences in the payload, so and the APIs that you're hitting. So in a lot of cases, trying to translate that utilization, how it works, into the actual implementation of what do I need to do is a lot of what our teams end up doing, and we end up crossing those barriers between marketing and tech a lot. And just kind of another example that we've built internally is this concept of, okay, you have this tool now, how do you actually use it? So we've started kind of putting together these blueprints of like, hey, you want to set up a welcome series, here's how you do that. And I think that tact of opinionated or expertise guidance is something that we're very passionate about, making sure that our customers feel like they're getting the best information from us. And along those same lines, from a tech and a marketing perspective, you have to differentiate that message, right? You have to kind of, if you're talking to somebody who's on the dev team, explain, okay, if you're implementing it this way, this is how you set up that payload. This is how you make that API call. Here's what to do if you get a 503 or a 429. Here's how you build an exponential back off and retry. On the marketing side, they have a completely different and not necessarily any easier set of requirements of how to actually go in and build the copy and send the message and make sure they're targeting the right audience. But they're almost completely divergent in the requirements of what they're doing.
think it makes me think, Ramsey, about the customer onboarding we've been working on recently, where we had a new enterprise customer coming in to work with us on our platform, and what we did was actually take some time to do discovery with that customer, but we did it as a partnership between our two teams. So there was a ton of technical discovery that had to happen, a lot of systems architecture detail, really important stuff, right? If you don't have that plumbing there's not going to be any data or any messaging that goes out, right? So we have to get that done. But at the same time, we also wanted to understand what were the customer's business goals, what were the KPIs or their stretch goals that they're striving for within their consumer base, and then how do we help structure the platform and the settings to best support them.
Yeah, and from a tech perspective, trying to get those requirements outlined early and built into the structure of it so that there's not as much last minute whip snapping around trying to get everything implemented. And so I think that's been a very effective way of doing it. But again, this was just kind of to seed the ideas from the group. And I think probably to kind of seed the conversation, one of the things that we've been having a lot of conversations with our customers about, and I think is kind of an ongoing thread in MarTech right now, is this concept of testing, right? Like, it's easy to say we run tests. It's very different to have a testing methodology as part of your org. And that's something that I think has to permeate both the marketing side and the tech side, because when you're building your tests or executing your tests or understanding the results of your tests, everybody has to be on the same page. So with that in mind, I think from some of the folks who are joining, what are your, how do you feel like your group or your company or your industry even is doing as far as testing and really building in a testing methodology for test and learn? But yeah, so Jennie, what, I know that we've been working with a couple of customers who have, from a marketing perspective, have a pretty decent understanding of testing, but that doesn't always align with the dev perspective. Where do you think some of those challenges kind of come into play from a tech implementation versus the actual tool and marketing utilization?
Yeah, I think it's, I see a lot of the times that people are speaking differently. So like speaking in like a code style communication versus business goal type communication. And I like that recently we've been taking time with those teams to align and come up with, okay, what do you mean by that? And like your chart that you were showing with the diagram, it's like, okay, here's what this means. And getting that shared language and shared understanding, I think is so important. Because if we're all saying something and we think that we mean the same thing, but really we mean something totally opposite, nobody's going to get anywhere. And then we end up with those last minute quick turn things that you mentioned.
So Tyler has a great question. It says, "What can you elaborate what you mean by testing?" That's a really good question. I think from our perspective, when we think of testing, we think of things like message copy, right? So if you have an existing automated campaign or an existing email template that you're using, being able to test different copy and test the effectiveness of new types of messaging or new copy. Testing the number of touch points. So for example, if you typically have 2 touch points for an abandoned cart campaign and you want to add a third one, understanding the outcome of that third touch point in that series. And then also timing, I think, is another one we see a lot of people testing is the timing of messages. Does sending a message at 6 a.m. versus 7:15 a.m. have an impact on engagement? That I really think just kind of scratches the surface. And one of the things I would dive into as well with that I'd love to get some feedback from the group on is, even those things that I've outlined, there's differences in the way that you test it. And then you need to make sure that you can actually have defensible and repeatable results. Otherwise, the test isn't really a test. It's just a shot in the dark. So I think that's the other piece of it, is making sure that when you are testing, that you're capturing data, you're capturing information, and you're able to put together those repeatable and kind of defensible results.
Yeah, absolutely. And even Sydney had a question about, what are folks testing on mobile and what's trending. I love that one. So one really fun thing is testing images within push messages. So we know statistically that an image gets a better response rate. So if there's an image in the message, it's 50% higher response of a direct engagement. But the interesting thing is to see for your brand what plays with your audience, right? What different types of images are going to be engaging. Is it? I know that a lot of sports teams will do images, but we found that the more contextual, the more relevant the image is to the message, the better response that folks will get. So that's one fun thing. Personalization is another. So what personalization works? I mean, personalization is fantastic, right? But what types of personalization work for your audience and for the message stream that you're in? So those are a couple of things that we've been seeing recently at Airship.
Yeah, and the personalization one is really interesting from a tech perspective because it requires you to make a lot more data available to the systems that are responsible for sending that content out. Capturing result feedback is also potentially harder. You have to kind of build in, like, you need to know what you're going to test before you test it, which is a general good rule, but especially with personalization campaigns, you really have to know where that data is coming from, how it's getting inserted into the message, and ultimately what the results are from it. And I think where we see customers, today is trying to find that space where it's not, boring personalization, but it's also not creepy personalization, because there's a nice narrow gap where, like, you've got the right amount of personalization that somebody feels like you really understand them, but that you're not, like, in their house. So we have to kind of shoot that gap to find the right engagement, and that a lot of times is borne out through the data, through testing.
Yeah, and I think your abandoned cart one is interesting because I recently experienced a real abandoned cart fail that was a little off-putting. So I'd been browsing around, I don't know about you guys, but I've been sort of rethinking my wardrobe due to the constant work from home. And yeah, Sydney, I agree. Boring versus creepy is a fine line. Good comment. So I'd been browsing around like, maybe these pants might work, and let me think about it. And I, like I typically do, I'll add it to my cart to like think on it and then come back to it. So I did that one evening after dinner. I woke up the next morning to 3 messages about, hey, did you forget this? Looks like you were looking at this. Hey, you should come back. You should come back. You should come back. 3 within just a small number of hours. And I was like, oh, that's maybe we should rethink the timing on that. Give people a while to think it over.
So Tyler has a question for me. It says, are you on the marketing side or tech side? The answer is yes. I help from a technical perspective. So I run a lot of the architectural review sessions with our customers, understanding, like, okay, if you're using AWS or Azure or GCP, or if you have an inbuilt system, or if you're pulling data from Adobe or Salesforce, how does that ultimately get into Airship? How do we build something that's a sustainable pipeline through that? If they're taking data out of Airship through our real-time data stream, is that going to an S3 bucket? Is it going to Kinesis? Are you consuming that through a homespun consumer that's going to load it into your data lake? So I help a lot on the tech side. From a marketing perspective, where I try and fit in, and where my team really tries to fit in, ultimately, is being that bridge, between the dev teams and the tech teams and the product teams that ultimately are responsible for implementing the technology and building those services or augmenting those services to support what the marketing team is trying to do on Airship. And the marketing team that ultimately has, specific, usually very specific KPIs, business goals, campaigns they want to run. And so that's where Jennie's team and my team work really well together, is, kind of taking those 2 different sides of the same problem, and trying to make sure that they're coordinated, so that we're not building things on the dev side that, the dev team spends 3 sprints putting together, what they think is what the marketing team wants. The marketing team gets it and goes, what the hell is this? So trying to avoid as much of that as possible. I think to kind of expand on that a little bit, like, if you're a dev team that is building things for a customer facing product, everyone's on the marketing side. Because ultimately you have to be thinking about, how is a user going to utilize this? Or how is this data going to be made available in a way that ultimately impacts the end user? And so I think it's important to have that context, even if it's just, building the systems that support it.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to develop a customer experience, right? Like that's our end goal. So no matter what team you're in, I think it's, trying to keep that in mind is super helpful in conversations. Because if we're talking to strategy folks about a bunch of API documentation, I think they're going to glaze over. And similarly, if you're talking about a bunch of design things to a bunch of engineers, maybe they're not going to care. So we like to make sure we have that shared goal and shared conversation. Couple quick housekeeping things because I saw a bunch of people have joined on the session. If you have questions, put them in the chat, or you're welcome to actually join and share on the screen. There's a way to request on the top. It should be on about the top right side of your screen to say share audio and video. That doesn't cut us off. It just lets you kind of bop into the conversation. So we're happy for you to join and talk with us that way. Or you can put questions in the chat and we'll share them out to the group. Tyler, a couple good questions from you here. So one is, how are you streamlining the communication between teams? Yeah, this is I think an ongoing flexible thing that we're trying to work with. So we have our procedures and processes that we use as an Airship team when we're working with customers, but we also like to adapt and flex to that our customer base is structured, right? Like we don't want to try to force our customers to like squeeze into the way that we operate. So we try to be flexible with them. What we'll typically do is have a couple of different work streams. So Ramsey's crew on the tech side will have developer and engineer meetings going, and then my team will have business review type meetings going at the same time. And then we make sure to have at least weekly a time when we're all coming back together and having a shared conversation.
Yeah, and I think a couple things to add there. The tool that we use, so we use, hey Tyler.
Hey, welcome back.
I didn't know this would work. I was trying to do this the whole time. I think it was my browser.
Yeah, it freezes up sometimes. So yeah, if folks are trying, just kind of keep hitting it and it'll pop back.
So I think one thing that a lot of people get hung up on is the tooling. Like we use Jira, we use Slack, we use Google Sheets and Docs and Rezo and all that stuff. But like ultimately the tool is if you have a bad tool, you have a bad tool and it doesn't fit in with your org. If you have a good tool, that doesn't make it so that it's just going to work. Like you still have to have the processes and the responsibilities in place to make sure that the tool operates. So to kind of further Jennie's point, like we have customers we work with who use Microsoft Teams. We have customers we work with who use Slack. We have customers we work with who use neither of those. And ultimately everything happens in email. But the process of making sure that we have, regular check-ins with them to make sure that what we're saying makes sense, both from a dev perspective and a marketing perspective, that we adapt the documentation. So you mentioned earlier the slides I was showing, like we have a slide that is just docs, right? That if I hand that to a developer, they're going to go throw that in Postman, test an API call and say, cool, it works. If I show that to a marketing team, they're going to go, what is this and why do I care? For the most part, again, generalizing. So putting together documentation that is targeted at the different groups, I think is important. Durable documentation during any process. So making sure that as you're going through a new project or a new process, that you're creating that shared documentation between the teams and that everybody has access to it, everybody has visibility to it, and everybody can comment on it. I think that's really important because ultimately the dev team that's responsible for implementing things needs to get realistic feedback from the team that's ultimately going to use it.
Who's
granted product
for this? Is this the product manager's responsibility? Like who is in charge of bridging the gap here?
So there's a few levels to it in the way that we operate. So first off, we have a crackerjack documentation team who makes super beautiful development documentation.
Crackerjack documentation
yes,
team.
they are.
I wish my startup had that. What does that mean?
They're incredible, right? Like they're just like they're on it. And
their sole functionality is to create docs.
Yeah, we have
where do I find that for my company?
Yeah, and but that's why they're so solid. So that we operate on a continuous release cycle in our product team. So every time they have something coming, boom, 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 new docs are going up. And then we internally get educated by the product managers. So Lisa Orr, one of our product managers, did a discussion panel yesterday. So, for example, she's just one of a few product managers we have, but she'll come in and give us training on everything new that got released as a customer facing team. So we have those two layers internally. Then Ramsey's team and mine and the account management team, all three partner together to then educate customers. So if there is an engineer who needs an answer about how does an API work, or I'm getting a response that's weird, somebody from Ramsey's team is going to jump in. If there's, how do I do this use case? This is what my goal is. Help me ideate on things. Then my team will come in and we flex and kind of partner together. And a lot of those calls we do is shared because we believe that it's a rounded conversation. So we like to get folks together, like all in the same crew.
And I think the piece of the documentation is really important because, again, our documentation is really great if you want to know exactly how our API works, all the pieces that come back. But I always like to equate it to it's a very detailed oven manual. It's really good for the person who needs to know how the oven works. It's not great for baking cookies. So the other side of that is making sure that when we're speaking to our customers about utilizing our products, that we're laying it in a way that, okay, this tool, this thing, let's take our custom events, for example, it is this. You have the ability to send us event data of what your users are doing, and it has properties associated with it. Ultimately, how you use that is in this way. You use it to trigger automated messages. You use it to segment users who have done a specific thing in the last 30 days. So the tool itself that we have and utilization of that feature need to be explained differently in a lot of ways, because the implementation of it and the utilization of it, while they're obviously tied, because if you implement it poorly, you can't really use it, they're different because you have different perspectives on that same feature.
Yeah, and coming back to the testing question, I think it was Sydney had this a little while ago. So what are you testing and how are you testing and measuring, right? So a great micro example of this is our documentation has super detailed instructions on how to send purchase data over by our API so that we can actually measure the ROI on a single message that has been sent. But that's it. There's documentation instructions, and then there's, well, let's talk about what do you want to test. Are we trying to incentivize purchase? Are we going to look at incrementality of order value or frequency of purchase? What is the actual thing that we're testing with this retailer and or restaurant? In the case of purchases, could be either. How do we want to measure that? And then, okay, for the engineering side, here's how we would get that purchase data in so that we could actually build a dashboard to look at the incremental revenue.
So here's an interesting one. I'm gonna paraphrase this a little bit, Brittany, but the concept is how do you incorporate, as people are releasing things in the COVID work from home era, how do more people want to be involved in testing and approval and things of that nature? And how do you, account for either more or less people wanting to be involved in that process with work from home? I think work from home has really changed a lot of processes. I'll be the first one to say that there is no 9 to 5 anymore. Well, I'm not the first one to say it, but I'll say that there's no 9 to 5 anymore. Basically we're available when our customers are available, which is, pretty much they're all working from home. So I think when it comes specifically to approval processes or testing or things of that nature, it does make it a little bit harder. Because it used to be you would take whatever you have and give that to your QA team and they'd run through UAT testing, and then they'd bring it back and they'd say they're done. Well, now, with everything happening either more openly through things like Slack and sessions like this and Zoom meetings, or less openly because it's just happening in one-to-one emails, I feel like there's a lot less direct involvement in those processes, which
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, I think that working from home for me, I've been reading a ton about asynchronous communication. Todoist has a blog out that's really interesting called We Are Async. And Brittany talking about like, how do we actually get those asynchronous conversations going. So, we're a global team at Airship, and we're working between, basically Central European and Pacific time every single day. Ramsey and I are operating in that spread every single day. And we want to make sure that we're keeping everybody who's in Germany in the same loop as the people who are in Portland. So how are we getting those shared conversations? I also, somebody popped on audio. I'd love to, Stenberg, if you have questions, do you want to kind of pop into the conversation here, something to add?
No, I'm just listening because I've just entered.
Well, welcome. Yeah, come on.
Thank you. Because I've been trying. I tried, but it wasn't connecting.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you joined in. Thank you so much. And it's our friend Matt Hudson from Belk just joined us. Welcome. Hello. If you guys didn't see it today, Matt shared some content yesterday. I'm sure the recording will be up for folks who might not have been there live. Welcome. Matt, any thoughts you want to add? I know you're passionate about getting everybody to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I joined. Well, first thing, I just wanted to mention what Ramsey was saying. I have this T-shirt on. It says "Never Break," and the break is crossed out with break. And the shirt I had before, but the idea of it is that our lives are intertwined, and I think COVID has just brought everybody to where IT has been for a long time, which is if you want to really support your customers, whether they're customer facing or if they're B2B, then you got to be available all the time. And it's tough. We try to intertwine our lives, but what I love about COVID is that it's not a problem when my kids join the calls. But also I'm available at all times, for my team. And so as far as working together, I mean, I have a great relationship with my product manager. We text each other often. We have a good personal relationship. And I think that makes a big difference in the trust factor of working with your team, whether they're a product manager, IT side, or the engineering side. And but yeah, trust is what it's about. It's somebody asked me one time, how do you get consensus? And I was like, well, it's not about consensus. It's about trust. And that's what the important part is. So.
Well, I think expectations as well. Like if everybody clearly understands the outcomes, understands the expectations of whatever it is that you're trying to do, it's a lot easier to have that trust and that collaboration. I think where we, at least from the customers I've worked with, where I've seen that not work so well is when, to Tyler's point earlier, like, if the teams aren't finding a way to collaborate, if there's not a common thread between them, whether that be a stand up that the marketing team attends, or a Google sheet where everybody just documents what they're working on, or a Slack channel, or some other form of shared comms between those groups, you're going to have diverging priorities, diverging understanding. And then ultimately the trust won't be there, right? Because the marketing team is going to say, oh, well, the dev team screwed this up last time. Well, okay, but if you didn't set the expectations properly,
we can all blame QA though. We can all blame QA.
No, not QA. No, don't do it, Matt. Don't do it. No, I like that, and I listened to a conversation actually earlier today with the founder of Women of Email talking about humanization of messaging, and I think that with the interactions in COVID, there's been a humanization of our interactions between teams. Matt, to your point, like the different seeing parts of different people's lives, I think has brought us closer together in a way, even though we're not in the offices. Great. I know. Are we at time, Ramsey? I'm actually just looking at the clock. We kind of flew by here. Does anybody out there have questions that we want to add before we head out?
You guys rock. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. You started the trend, Tyler. You jumped in, and then everybody else. Yeah, we couldn't have done it without you.
Thanks, guys.
solid questions too. And I think, you know,
Yeah.
just to like, those are questions everybody's asking, right? Like if this was easy to do, we wouldn't have an interactive session on it taking 30 minutes out of everybody's day to talk about it, right? But I agree with Matt. I think it comes down to trust. I think it comes down to setting expectations. I think it comes down to finding a way to collaborate, and being open and honest with the people that you're working with. Because if you're not, like, ultimately you're gonna create those divergences in the understanding, and when that's ultimately what drives a lot of conflict within every group, is people just having diverging understanding of the same problem. So.
And just to sort of renege on what I said before, I actually think that if the engineering team has a close relationship with QA, it can make a much better experience for the customer. And if dev blames QA or QA, you know, blames dev, it's problematic. But with my QA teams in all places, and it makes our customers' life better. And he can trust me if I say it's not our problem or if it's not their problem, et cetera. And so ultimately, yeah, that's just what it comes down to. But I was just joking about QA for sure.
we know.
We're on to something.
We know. Oh, and I like this from Nina. Is that our buddy Nina? Nina, welcome. Hey, hi. So I didn't see your name pop in when you first joined. Welcome. So yeah, alignment. I agree. Nina is definitely the hardest part. Like getting everybody to have a conversation, and then like let's all talk about what are the different needs of different teams, right? Like everybody. And unless you've sat down and understood, you know, what are the marketing team processes, what are the engineering team processes, and had that shared understanding between the two, like, yeah, we have to do that conversation to make things work together.
By the way, Nina went to the University of Arkansas, so go Hogs. And yeah.
All right, nice. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you guys so much for joining in. We really appreciate everybody being part of the conversation, and I hope we can kind of continue this. Definitely, you know, connect with Ramsey and me on LinkedIn. We're happy to continue the conversation if you guys want to chat. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And there's a lot of other great sessions, so please stay around for Mobile on Air for the remainder of the event.
All right, awesome. Thanks everybody.
All right, bye guys. Thanks for joining.